It's not like I don't understand where she's coming from. When Lisa started saying that our marriage had gotten boring, I knew she wasn't just pulling that out of nowhere. I mean, we've been together for quite some time now, and it's true that the routine has kind of settled in. We wake up, we work, we come back home, and we have dinner. It's predictable, it's safe, and yeah, maybe it's a bit dull sometimes. But I thought that was just how things go eventually. I guess I was wrong because, to her, it's become a problem. The conversation started off casually enough. One of those late Sunday afternoons where we were both sitting on the couch, scrolling on our phones. Out of nowhere, she put her phone down, looked at me, and just said it, "Don't you feel like we're getting boring?" It wasn't angry or accusing, but the words hit me harder than I expected. I tried to laugh it off at first, like a joke of, well, that's married life, right? Comfort over chaos. But she didn't smile. Instead, she sighed, and her eyes got that distant look, like she was already miles away from here. What followed wasn't even a full-blown argument. It was more like this tense back and forth. She kept pointing out how we never did anything spontaneous anymore, how everything felt predictable. I tried to counter, reminding her of all the small, steady things we shared, Sunday breakfasts, movie nights, and even the walks we took together in the evenings. To me, those moments were meaningful, even if they weren't the grand adventures she seemed to want. But every time I tried to explain my point, she'd just shake her head, almost like she felt sorry for me, like I just didn't get it. The part that really got under my skin, though, was when she said she felt like we were just roommates. That hit me deep because I love Lisa, I really do. To think that she was feeling so disconnected from me, like we were just two people sharing a space instead of partners building a life together, it made me angry, and it made me feel helpless at the same time. I told her I didn't see it that way, that maybe she was overthinking things, but she didn't back down. She said she needed more, that she needed excitement, and that I wasn't giving it to her. I guess what frustrates me the most is that I don't know how to be that kind of guy for her. I'm not the spontaneous type, never have been. I'm not the guy who plans surprise trips or does big romantic gestures. I'm the guy who makes sure the bills are paid on time, who fixes the leaky faucet, who makes sure she has what she needs. I thought that counted for something, but apparently, it's not enough anymore. And instead of trying to meet in the middle, it feels like she's just pushing me further away, trying to provoke me into being someone I'm not. It started with small things, almost like little tests. She'd mention things she knew I wouldn't be interested in, like wanting to go to some new club downtown or talking about some wild adventure one of her friends had. She'd say it casually, but I could tell she was waiting for my reaction, hoping I'd step out of my comfort zone and surprise her. But when I didn't, when I just stuck to my usual, steady responses, she'd roll her eyes or give me that disappointed smile that made me feel like a failure. Lately, though, it's been more than just those little comments. She's been spending a lot more time on her phone, and it's not just scrolling through social media. She's texting someone, and whenever I walk into the room, she puts her phone down quickly or changes the topic. I don't want to be the paranoid husband, I really don't. I want to trust her. But there's this nagging feeling in my gut that something's not right, that maybe she's already looking for the excitement she wants somewhere else. And now, she started taking phone calls in another room. She'll excuse herself from the table, or leave the living room, and I can hear her voice, muffled through the walls. It's always cheerful, almost flirtatious, and it's driving me crazy trying to figure out who she's talking to and what they're talking about. I don't want to confront her about it because, honestly, I'm scared of what she might say. I don't know if I'm ready to hear that she's already given up on us. So here we are. She thinks I'm boring, that our life together has lost its spark, and I don't know how to fix it. It all started when Lisa met someone new. She came home one evening, excitedly telling me about a woman she had met at a yoga class. Her name was Chloe, and from what Lisa described, she was full of energy, spontaneous, and fun, all the things Lisa felt she was missing lately. I remember how her face lit up talking about Chloe, and I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. It was the kind of excitement I hadn't seen in her for a while, and here she was, finding it in someone new. Still, I wanted to be supportive. Maybe having a new friend was just what Lisa needed to feel better about things, and maybe it would take some pressure off me to be everything she needed. Over the next few weeks, Lisa and Chloe started spending more and more time together. It was almost like high school all over again, the way she'd get dressed up to meet Chloe for lunch or how she'd talk about all the fun things they did together. They went shopping, they went to new restaurants, they even went out dancing once, something Lisa had been asking me to do for years, but I always found an excuse not to. Part of me felt relieved that she had someone to do those things with, but another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was being left behind, that she was building a new life that didn't really include me. One night, Lisa suggested that we invite Chloe over for dinner. She said it so casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world, but I felt a pang of discomfort. It wasn't that I didn't want to meet her new friend, but I guess I was nervous about how it would feel to be the outsider. Still, I agreed. I figured it was better to meet Chloe and see for myself who this woman was, rather than just hear about her all the time. So, I helped Lisa prepare dinner, and that evening, Chloe came over to our home for the first time. From the moment she walked in, Chloe was the lot. She was loud, she was confident, and she had this way of taking up all the space in the room. She wore a dress that was tight and revealing, and she moved around our house like she owned the place, making herself comfortable without even asking. She complimented me on my cooking, but it felt more like she was humoring me than genuinely appreciating it. She made jokes that bordered on inappropriate, and she kept touching Lisa, little touches on her arm, her shoulder, even her thigh, in a way that made me uncomfortable. But Lisa seemed to love it. She laughed at everything Chloe said, her eyes bright, her smile wide, and I found myself feeling like a stranger in my own home. At one point during dinner, Chloe turned her attention to me, asking me questions about my job, about my hobbies. She was polite enough, but there was this undertone to her questions, almost like she was mocking me. She made a joke about how Lisa must be bored listening to me talk about work all the time, and Lisa laughed along with her. It stung, but I forced myself to smile and play along. I didn't want to make a scene, and I didn't want to ruin the evening for Lisa. If this was what made her happy, I could put up with it for one night. After dinner, we moved to the living room, and Chloe opened a bottle of wine she had brought. She poured generously, and before long, the two of them were giggling like teenagers. Chloe kept making these offhand comments about relationships, about how men could be so clueless, and Lisa just kept nodding along, agreeing with everything she said. I sat there, feeling more and more out of place, wondering if this was how Lisa felt with me now, like she just didn't belong. I tried to join in the conversation, but every time I did, Chloe would steer it back to something that excluded me, something only she and Lisa could relate to. By the end of the night, I was exhausted. I watched as Lisa hugged Chloe goodbye at the door, their embrace lingering a little too long for my comfort. Chloe waved at me, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and then she was gone. Lisa closed the door, and I could see how happy she was. She looked alive in a way I hadn't seen in months, and I knew that Chloe was part of that. I wanted to be happy for her, I really did, but there was this nagging feeling I couldn't shake, that maybe this friendship was pulling Lisa further away from me, instead of bringing her back. It all started gradually. Lisa would come home later than usual, her face flushed and apologetic as she'd explained that work had been hectic. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have days when things get out of hand and deadlines pile up. She worked in a field where last-minute issues could spring up, and I understood that. But what was a once-in-a-while occurrence soon turned into something more frequent. 3 nights in a row she came home late, each time with a different excuse, and each time with that same strained smile, like she was trying to reassure me without fully convincing herself. I tried to keep myself busy during those evenings. I cooked dinner, sometimes for just myself, sometimes hoping she'd come home early enough to eat with me. I tried to leave it warm for her, but often it would sit untouched until morning. It's not like she was completely unreachable. She'd text me, letting me know she'd be late, sometimes even apologizing. But there was something off about the whole situation. It wasn't just about her coming home late, it was how she seemed distant even when she was finally here. She'd eat quietly, lost in her own thoughts, her mind somewhere else. I found myself staring at her across the table, wondering if she even noticed. I wanted to trust her. It wasn't like Lisa to lie, and I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned every move his wife made. But there were moments, little signs, that made me question things. She'd take calls late at night, stepping out of the room for privacy, or she'd be on her phone, texting someone with a smile she tried to hide. I knew I was being paranoid, and I hated that feeling. I wanted to believe that she was just overwhelmed with work, that maybe this was a rough patch, and she'd soon be back to her usual self. But that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let go. One evening, she came home particularly late. I had waited up for her, my mind swirling with all the possible scenarios that could explain why she was coming home later and later. When she walked through the door, she looked exhausted. Her hair was a little messy, and she gave me a tired smile. I decided that I couldn't take it anymore. I had to ask her. I had to know what was really going on. So, as she put her things down, I approached her, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding. I asked her, straight out, why she was coming home late so often, and if there was something she wasn't telling me. Lisa looked at me, her eyes widening for just a moment before she sighed. She sat down on the couch, motioning for me to do the same. She told me that she understood why I was worried, that she could see how it might look from my side. She said that she had been trying to feel like herself again, trying to feel interesting and loved, and that at first, she'd done things like talk on the phone in a way that would make me jealous or leave the room to take calls just to see how I'd react. She admitted that she'd wanted to provoke a reaction from me, to feel like I still cared enough to be bothered by it. But then she assured me that lately, it really was just work keeping her late. That things had gotten busy, and she didn't want to bring her stress home with her. But despite her words, the late nights didn't stop. The next week, it was the same pattern, coming home late, often after I had already given up on waiting for her for dinner. She'd text me, letting me know she'd be late, but it always felt like an afterthought. And when she finally did come through the door, she looked exhausted, her eyes dull, her smile forced. It wasn't that she wasn't trying. She'd come in and kiss me on the cheek, thank me for waiting up, but it felt like her mind was still elsewhere. I could tell she was tired, and I wanted to be understanding, but every night that she came home late, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. After our conversation, I thought things would change. I thought maybe she'd make an effort to come home on time, or at least earlier, but it didn't happen. Every night it was the same, a rushed text, an apology, and then coming home long after the evening had turned into night. I tried to be patient, to remind myself that work could genuinely be that demanding. But there were things that didn't add up. If it was just work, why did she always seem so distant when she finally got home? Why did it feel like she was relieved when I didn't press her for details about her day? One night, she came home even later than usual, her hair slightly damp as if she'd showered somewhere else. She looked at me, her eyes tired, and gave me a half-hearted smile. I asked her how work had been, trying to keep my voice neutral. She said it had been a long day, that things were just crazy, and she was sorry for being late again. I wanted to believe her, but there was something in her eyes, something guarded, something that made me feel like she wasn't telling me the whole truth. I didn't push her, but I could feel the distance between us growing wider with every passing day. I started to notice other things too. She'd come home with new clothes, things I hadn't seen before, and when I asked about them, she'd say they were just things she picked up during her lunch break. She started wearing perfume more often, even on days when she said she was just working late. I wanted to ask her why, to demand an answer, but every time I tried, I found myself holding back. I didn't want to accuse her of something without proof, and I didn't want to drive her further away. But the doubt was always there, gnawing at me, making me question everything. 2 weeks had passed, and Lisa's late nights showed no sign of letting up. Every evening, the same pattern repeated itself. She'd send a brief message, letting me know she was working late, then arrive home looking tired and distant. I tried to be patient, tried to trust her, but after everything that had happened, I was done with just taking her word for it. Something didn't add up, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I wasn't going to sit around and let doubt eat me alive any longer. I decided that I needed to find out for myself what was really going on. It wasn't like Lisa to lie, but her explanations felt increasingly hollow, and I wasn't going to ignore my instincts any longer. I knew her work schedule, knew the names of her colleagues, and even knew some of their numbers from past company events. It wasn't hard to decide what my next move would be. If Lisa wasn't going to be straight with me, then I was going to find the truth myself. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Karen, one of Lisa's closer colleagues. Karen had always seemed friendly enough, and I figured if anyone would be willing to talk, it would be her. I didn't waste time overthinking it. I hit the call button, listening to the ringing on the other end. My heart was steady, my mind focused. I wasn't doing this to start a fight, I was doing this because I needed answers. When Karen picked up, I kept the conversation casual at first. I told her I was just checking in, mentioning that Lisa had been working late a lot recently, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay at the office. Karen paused for a moment, and I could hear the confusion in her voice when she responded. She told me that, as far as she knew, things had been pretty normal, no big projects, no late-night rushes. In fact, she mentioned that most of the team had been leaving on time for the past few weeks. That was all I needed to hear. My jaw tightened, and I felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. I pressed her a little more, asking if Lisa had been staying behind after everyone else. Karen hesitated, then said she hadn't noticed Lisa staying late at all. She sounded genuinely puzzled, even a little concerned, and I could tell she was starting to piece together that something wasn't right. I thanked her, keeping my tone calm and polite, and ended the call. As I put the phone down, a sense of grim determination washed over me. Lisa had been lying to me, and now I had proof, or at least enough to know that her story didn't hold water. I wasn't the type to sit back and let things slide, not when it came to something this important. If she was lying about work, then the question was, what was she really doing during those late nights? I thought back to all the times she'd come home looking exhausted, her excuses about work, the way she'd avoid my eyes when I asked her about her day. It all made sense now, and the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't angry, at least, not in the way I expected to be. I was cold, calculating, already planning my next steps. That night, I didn't say anything to Lisa when she finally came home. I watched her as she walked through the door, her smile tired and her eyes avoiding mine. She kissed me on the cheek, murmured something about a long day, and headed to the bedroom to change. I just nodded, my face expressionless, my mind already working through what I needed to do next. I wasn't going to confront her without more evidence. No, I needed to be sure. I needed to catch her in whatever lie she was spinning. It was late, well past midnight, and Lisa was already asleep beside me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything that had been happening over the past few weeks. The doubts, the suspicions, the lies. It all came crashing down on me at once, a weight I could no longer ignore. I needed to know. I needed to see for myself what she had been hiding. I glanced over at her, her breathing steady and peaceful, and my eyes moved to her phone lying on the nightstand. I hesitated for just a moment, then reached for it. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I was past the point of caring about right or wrong. I needed answers. Unlocking her phone was easy. I knew her passcode, it was the same one she had used for years. I opened her messages, my heart pounding as I scrolled through her contacts. There it was, a conversation with Chloe. My jaw clenched as I opened the thread, my eyes scanning the messages. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just chatter about plans, about life. But as I scrolled further, the tone began to shift. They were discussing an upcoming birthday celebration, and I could see Lisa trying to come up with excuses to give me reasons why she'd be out late. My chest tightened, anger bubbling up as I read her words. Then, I came across a message from Chloe that made my blood run cold. Just make sure you use protection this time. If you bring home someone else's kid, your husband is definitely going to figure out you've been seeing that bald guy from Brazzers. I read the message again, my mind refusing to process it at first. My hand shook as I held the phone, my eyes locked on those words. Protection? Someone else's kid? The bald guy? It hit me all at once, like a punch to the gut. She was cheating on me. All the suspicions, all the doubts, they were true. She had been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now I had the proof right in front of me. I felt a wave of rage wash over me, hot and overwhelming. I wanted to wake her up, to confront her right then and there, to demand answers. But I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose control, not now. I needed to think, to figure out what I was going to do. I put her phone back on the nightstand, my mind racing as I got out of bed and left the room. I needed space, needed to get away from her, even if just for a few minutes. I walked to the living room, my fists clenched, my jaw tight. I couldn't believe it. After everything we had been through, after all the times I had tried to be patient, to understand, this was how she repaid me. Sitting down on the couch, I tried to take a deep breath, to steady myself. But the anger wouldn't go away. It was like a fire burning inside me, growing hotter with every passing second. I thought about all the times she had lied to my face, all the excuses about work, all the late nights. I thought about the way she had looked at me, the way she had smiled, knowing full well what she was doing behind my back. It made me sick. I had trusted her, had given her the benefit of the doubt, and she had thrown it all away. And for what? Some guy she met on the side? The thought of it made my stomach turn. I knew I couldn't let this slide. I wasn't the kind of man who could just look the other way, who could pretend that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. She had betrayed me, had made a fool out of me, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. But I also knew that I needed to be smart about this. If I confronted her now, in the heat of the moment, it would just turn into a screaming match, and I wouldn't get the answers I needed. No, I had to be careful. I had to play this right, to make sure that when I confronted her, there would be no way for her to lie her way out of it. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, my mind racing with plans, with thoughts of what I was going to do next. I knew one thing for sure, our marriage was over. There was no coming back from this, no way to fix what she had broken. But I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. I was going to make sure she knew exactly what she had done, make sure she felt the weight of her choices. I thought about the messages, about the way Chloe had encouraged her, had helped her come up with excuses. It wasn't just Lisa who had betrayed me, it was both of them. And I was going to make sure they both paid for it. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her keep lying to me, wasn't going to let her think she could get away with it. I was going to confront her, but not yet. I needed to gather more evidence, needed to make sure that when I finally did confront her, there would be no denying what she had done. I wasn't going to give her any room to twist the truth or make excuses. I was going to lay it all out in front of her, and I was going to watch as the reality of what she had done came crashing down around her. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. It was unorthodox, maybe even ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the idea once it had taken root. I wanted to confront Lisa in a way she would never forget, to shock her, to make sure that the betrayal she had orchestrated was exposed in the most undeniable manner possible. I wasn't just going to have a quiet talk with her. No, that would be too easy, too ordinary. I wanted to make a statement, and the idea of using a cake to deliver that statement was just crazy enough to feel right. I knew it would take something extreme to truly convey the depth of my anger and the absurdity of the lies she had been feeding me. I picked up my phone and started searching for bakeries. It wasn't just any cake I needed, I wanted one that could fit a person inside. Something big, elaborate, the kind of thing you'd see at a bachelor party or a glitzy event. I knew it was a long shot, but I was determined. The first few calls were exactly what I expected. The bakers either laughed, thinking it was some kind of prank, or politely told me they didn't do novelty orders like that. The rejections only fueled my resolve. I wasn't about to give up. I needed to find someone who would take this on, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. After a couple of hours, and a lot of dead ends, I finally got a lead. A small, independent bakery on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that didn't have the luxury of turning down a strange request if the money was good. The woman who answered the phone didn't laugh, didn't ask questions. She just listened as I explained what I needed, a cake with a frame strong enough to hold a grown man inside, something big and extravagant. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she was going to hang up. But then she spoke, her voice steady. "We can do it, but it's going to cost you." I didn't care about the cost. I told her I'd pay whatever it took, as long as she could have it ready in time. She gave me a price, and I agreed without hesitation. She said it would take a couple of days to get everything in place, and I told her that was fine. I needed time to get everything else ready anyway. I hung up the phone, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. The pieces were starting to come together, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. This was my move, my chance to take back the power that Lisa had stripped from me with her lies. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I could barely focus on anything else, my mind racing with all the details that needed to fall into place. I knew where the celebration would be. I had seen the address in her messages with Chloe. I knew the time, knew exactly when they'd be gathered there, thinking they were safe, thinking they were pulling one over on me. I could picture their faces when I showed up, could imagine the shock, the disbelief. It was petty, maybe even cruel, but I didn't care. Lisa had made a mockery of our marriage, and I was going to show her that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. By the end of the day, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. I had made the calls, put down the deposit, and now all I had to do was wait. I knew it was risky, that it could all blow up in my face, but the thought of doing nothing was unbearable. I needed this, needed to take back some semblance of control, to show Lisa that her actions had consequences. And if that meant climbing into a giant cake and delivering the truth in the most theatrical way possible, then so be it. I was ready. While the bakery worked on the cake, I knew I had other things to take care of. This wasn't just about the shock, the moment of confrontation. No, this was about ending everything once and for all. I wanted to be ready for the fallout, to have everything in place so that there would be no going back, no room for excuses or apologies. I needed to prepare for what came after the chaos, and that meant getting my legal affairs in order. If Lisa wanted out, and clearly she had been stepping out on our marriage for a while, then I was going to make sure she got exactly what she deserved. I was done playing the fool. I made the call to a lawyer that same afternoon. I chose someone who was known for being efficient and ruthless, someone who wouldn't waste time on pleasantries or hesitate when it came to protecting my interests. I wanted this done right, and I wanted it done quickly. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, listened as I explained my situation, her voice calm and professional as she asked me questions. She didn't seem surprised by anything I told her, maybe she had heard it all before, maybe betrayal was just another part of the job for her. Either way, she took it all in stride, which was exactly what I needed. We set up a meeting in her office the next morning. I walked in, feeling a mix of anger and determination, my mind focused on the task at hand. Claire had already prepared some preliminary paperwork based on what I had told her over the phone, and we went through everything together. She asked me about our assets, about our financial situation, about any shared accounts or property. It was cold, clinical, and exactly what I needed. There was no emotion in that room, no room for doubt or hesitation. This was business, pure and simple, and I was ready to move forward. As we worked through the details, Claire gave me a few pieces of advice, things I should do to protect myself, steps I needed to take to make sure Lisa couldn't come back later and try to take more than she deserved. I listened carefully, nodding as she spoke, my mind already picturing the moment when I'd hand Lisa those papers. There would be no more lies, no more pretending. I was going to lay it all out for her, and I was going to make sure she knew that this was final. She had made her choices, and now she was going to face the consequences. By the time I left Claire's office, I felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in weeks. The documents were ready, everything was in place. All I had to do was wait for the right moment, for the cake to be finished, for the party to happen. It was strange, almost surreal, to think that this chapter of my life was about to end. But there was no sadness, no regret. Just a cold determination to see it through. Lisa had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. And I was going to make sure that when the truth came out, there would be no escaping it. The next few days passed in a haze of preparations. I kept my routine as normal as possible, not wanting to tip Lisa off that anything was different. She still came home late, still gave me the same tired smiles and half-hearted excuses, and I played along, pretending that everything was fine. But inside, I was ready. I had the documents hidden away, ready for the moment I needed them. The cake was almost finished, the pieces were falling into place, and soon enough, it would all come crashing down. There was no turning back now, and I wouldn't have wanted to even if there was. It was early in the morning when Lisa told me she wanted to talk. I was still waking up, my mind foggy from sleep as she sat down across from me at the kitchen table. There was something different in her eyes, a kind of nervous excitement, and I could already feel my guard going up. I took a sip of my coffee, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. She cleared her throat, her gaze meeting mine, and then she said it, she wanted to try having an open relationship. Just like that, she dropped the bombshell, her voice almost casual, as if she were suggesting we try a new restaurant for dinner. I felt my stomach tighten, a rush of emotions hitting me all at once. Anger, disbelief, shock. But I kept my face calm, my expression neutral. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. I took another sip of my coffee, nodding slowly as she continued. She talked about how she had been thinking about it for a while, how she felt like maybe this was what we needed to bring some excitement back into our lives. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if this was a logical solution to whatever problem she thought we had. I listened, my mind racing, trying to keep my emotions in check. She went on, explaining how other couples had done it, how it had helped them feel more fulfilled. She said she didn't want to feel trapped, that she wanted to explore, to feel alive again. I just nodded, keeping my face blank, my hand steady as I held my coffee cup. Inside, I was seething. I couldn't believe the audacity of it, that she would sit there and suggest something like this after everything she had already done behind my back. She had already cheated, had already betrayed me, and now she wanted to make it official, to turn our marriage into some kind of joke. But I didn't let any of it show. I just smiled, a small, tight smile, and nodded along. When she finished, she looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I could see the hope in her eyes, the way she wanted me to agree, to say that I was on board with this new plan of hers. I forced myself to smile wider, to act like I was considering it. I told her that it sounded interesting, that I'd be open to discussing it more. She seemed relieved, even happy, like she thought we were on the same page. She got up from the table, saying she had to get ready for work, that she'd be home late again that night. I nodded, watching as she left the room, my mind already shifting gears. The moment she was out of sight, my smile dropped. I set my coffee cup down, my hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline surged through me. An open relationship. She wanted to keep seeing whoever she was seeing, but this time with my permission. It was almost laughable, the way she thought she could manipulate me into agreeing to this, to let her continue her affair without any consequences. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not now, not after everything I had planned. As soon as she left for work, I grabbed my keys and headed out. It was time. The cake was ready, the documents were prepared, and now I had the final push I needed to go through with it all. Her suggestion of an open relationship was the last straw, the final confirmation that there was nothing left to save. I drove to the bakery, my mind focused, my jaw set. There was no more doubt, no more hesitation. She had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The bakery was quiet when I arrived. The woman behind the counter recognized me immediately, her eyes widening slightly as I walked in. She nodded, disappearing into the back to get the cake. I waited, my heart pounding, my thoughts racing. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. Everything was about to come to a head, and there was no turning back now. When she returned, she wheeled out the massive cake, the frame hidden beneath layers of frosting and decorations. I looked at it, a cold smile tugging at my lips. It was perfect, exactly what I needed. The day of the party had finally arrived, and I knew there was no more room for hesitation. Everything I had planned, everything I had orchestrated, was leading up to this one moment. I made my way to the bakery in the early afternoon, my nerves surprisingly calm. The giant cake stood there, ready and waiting, and I could feel the adrenaline building inside me. Today was going to be the day that everything changed. I wasn't just going to confront Lisa, I was going to confront her in a way that she, and everyone else at that party, would never forget. It was a kind of poetic justice, a dramatic culmination of all her lies and deceit. I climbed into the hollowed-out space inside the cake, the frame sturdy enough to support my weight as I settled in. The documents were tucked carefully into my jacket, ready for when the moment came. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and the air was heavy with the sweet scent of frosting, but I didn't care. This was my stage, and I was ready to play my part. The bakery staff moved around, finalizing the preparations, and I could hear them talking in hushed tones. They probably thought I was crazy, and maybe I was. But I had reached the point where I no longer cared what anyone else thought. This was about exposing the truth. The delivery truck arrived, and the bakery staff carefully wheeled the cake out, loading it up. I remained silent, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to the sounds around me, the clanking of metal, the rumble of the truck's engine. I could feel the cake being lifted, shifted, and secured in place. The anticipation was almost unbearable, every second feeling like an eternity. The truck started moving, and I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. It was happening. I was on my way to the party, the place where Lisa and her friends thought they could celebrate without consequence. They had no idea what was coming. The ride in the back of the delivery truck was rough. Every bump in the road made me shift uncomfortably inside the cramped, dark space. The cake swayed slightly, and I had to brace myself against the frame to keep from losing balance. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of what was about to happen. I imagined the look on Lisa's face when she realized what was unfolding, the shock, the embarrassment. It was the only thing that kept me going, the thought of finally seeing her facade crumble. I had spent too long being the one left in the dark, and now it was her turn. The truck slowed to a stop, and I could hear muffled voices outside. There was a clattering as the back doors were opened, and I felt the cake being shifted and rolled out. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I stayed perfectly still, listening to the sounds around me. The voices were cheerful, excited, completely unaware of what was hidden inside. I could hear the faint strains of music and laughter, signs that the party was in full swing. The cake rolled forward, the wheels clattering over the threshold as it was brought inside. There was a pause as they positioned the cake, and I could feel the energy in the room shift. People gathered around, curious, waiting to see what kind of surprise was in store. I imagined Lisa standing there, smiling, clueless about what was about to happen. I took a deep breath, my muscles tensing as I prepared myself. This was it. There was no turning back now. The sounds of the party faded into the background, and all I could hear was my own breathing, steady and controlled. The cake came to a final stop, and I knew I was now at the center of the party. The sounds around me were muffled, but I could hear the chatter and laughter. I remained perfectly still, my heart beating steadily as I waited. This was the moment I had been preparing for, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I knew that whatever happened next, I was ready. There was nothing more to do but wait for the right moment to make my move. The moment had finally come. I could feel the cake being moved into place, and the excited voices around me grew louder. I could hear someone, probably the host, calling everyone over, announcing the surprise with a tone of giddy anticipation. Laughter, cheers, and the shuffling of feet filled the room. My heart was pounding, my breathing steady as I prepared myself for what was about to unfold. This was it. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could almost imagine the look on Lisa's face, expecting some silly, harmless surprise, completely unaware of what was really about to happen. I heard the rustling of the outer wrapping being peeled away, the excited murmurs growing louder as the cake was revealed in all its grandeur. Someone, maybe the host, maybe just a curious guest, began fiddling with the side panel of the cake, struggling slightly to find the release mechanism. I waited, every muscle in my body coiled like a spring, ready to explode into action. The seconds felt like hours, the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation echoing in the cramped space around me. Finally, I felt the panel give way, and light spilled in, momentarily blinding me. I pushed myself up and out of the cake, the frosting cracking and crumbling as I emerged. The laughter and cheers turned into stunned silence, and I could feel every eye in the room on me. I scanned the crowd, my eyes locking on Lisa. She was kneeling, her face just inches away from the man standing in front of her. Her lover. The shock on her face was immediate, her mouth dropping open as she froze in place. The man's eyes widened in confusion, his body tensing as he realized what was happening. The atmosphere in the room shifted in an instant, the carefree joy replaced by an awkward, almost panicked silence. Without a word, I stepped down from the cake, my eyes never leaving Lisa and the man she had been so intimate with. My steps were deliberate, my heart pounding in my ears, but my expression remained calm, almost detached. I could see Lisa's eyes welling with tears, her hands trembling as she slowly rose to her feet, her mouth opening as if she wanted to explain, to say something, anything. But I wasn't interested in her excuses. I was done listening to her lies. I turned to the man, her lover, and without hesitation, I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, yanking him away from her. The sound of my fist connecting with his face echoed through the stunned silence of the room. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and pain, and I felt a grim satisfaction wash over me. He tried to steady himself, but I wasn't interested in giving him another chance. I let go of his collar, shoving him away as I turned back to Lisa. She was crying now, her eyes pleading, her face pale as she took a step toward me, her hands outstretched. I ignored her, reaching into my jacket and pulling out the divorce papers I had carefully prepared. The weight of them felt heavy in my hand, a symbol of everything that had led to this moment. I walked up to Lisa, her tear-streaked face a mix of fear and disbelief. I held the papers out to her, my voice steady as I spoke. "Here you go, Lisa," I said, my tone cold, devoid of any emotion. "This is what you wanted, right? Your freedom?" She took the papers with trembling hands, her sobs growing louder as she looked down at them, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. The room was dead silent, everyone around us too stunned to move, to speak. I didn't care about the audience. This wasn't about them, this was about Lisa and the choices she had made. Lisa's sobs filled the room as she clutched the papers, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to speak, to apologize. But I wasn't interested in her apologies. She had made her choice, and now she was going to live with the consequences. I turned away from her, my gaze sweeping over the crowd, all of them too shocked to say a word. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their judgment, their disbelief. But I didn't care. This wasn't about them, and their opinions meant nothing to me. This was about reclaiming my life, about finally putting an end to the lies and betrayal. Without another word, I walked out of the room, the stunned silence following me as I made my way to the door. My heart was pounding, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, but I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in weeks. I had done what I needed to do, had confronted Lisa in a way that left no room for doubt, no room for lies. I had given her exactly what she deserved, and now it was time for me to move on. I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my face as I took a deep breath. A smile tugged at my lips as I walked away, the weight of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. I drove home in silence, the events of the day replaying in my mind. There was no sadness, no regret, just a sense of finality, of closure. Lisa had made her choices, and now I had made mine. The lies, the betrayal, the deceit, it was all behind me now. And as I pulled into the driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was finally free from the weight of a broken marriage. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to truly breathe. After leaving the party, I went straight home. I knew there was still more to do, and I wasn't about to leave anything unfinished. The house was quiet, empty, and I could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. I wasn't angry anymore. There was no rage, no boiling frustration, just a cold determination to see this through to the end. I walked into the bedroom, the place where so many lies had taken root, and I began to pack Lisa's things. I wanted her out. I wanted every trace of her gone from my home, from my life. I worked in silence, methodically folding her clothes, gathering her belongings, making sure that by the time she got here, there would be no question about what came next. The suitcase sat open on the bed, and I filled it without hesitation. Her clothes, her shoes, her makeup, all of it went in, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of her in our bedroom. I moved through the house like a ghost, taking down her photos, her decorations, everything that reminded me of the life we had built together. It was like erasing a memory, wiping clean every trace of the woman who had betrayed me. And with every item I packed away, I felt a sense of relief, a growing distance from the pain she had caused. By the time I was done, the house felt different, almost foreign, but it was a start. It was my space again, and I was determined to keep it that way. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I glanced out the window, seeing Lisa's car pulling up. She was here, and I knew what was coming. She had been crying when I left the party, her face pale and stricken, and I knew she wasn't going to come quietly. But I was ready for it. I had already made up my mind, and there was nothing she could say or do that would change it. I stood by the front door, waiting as I heard her footsteps approaching, her voice calling my name, shaky and desperate. The door flew open, and there she was, her eyes red, her face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted, her voice cracking as she stormed inside. "How could you do that to me? To embarrass me like that in front of everyone?" Her words were a mix of rage and desperation, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. But I wasn't moved. I wasn't interested in her attempts to play the victim, not after everything she had done. I stood my ground, my expression cold as I looked at her. "You did this to yourself, Lisa," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "I just made sure everyone saw who you really are." She looked at me, her face contorting in anger. "You think you can just throw me out like this? After everything we've been through? You think you can just pack my things and tell me to leave?" She took a step closer, her hands trembling as she pointed at me. "I made a mistake, okay? But we can work through this. We can fix it." I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "There's nothing left to fix, Lisa. You made your choices, and now you're going to live with them." I gestured to the suitcase sitting by the door, her belongings neatly packed away. "Take your things and go. You're not welcome here anymore." Her eyes widened, disbelief mingling with the anger on her face. She took a shaky breath, her voice breaking as she spoke. "You can't do this. You can't just throw me out like this. Where am I supposed to go?" I felt a surge of cold anger, my patience wearing thin. "I don't care where you go, Lisa," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Go back to your lover, go eat your damn cake for all I care. But you are not staying here. This is my house, and you are no longer a part of my life." The words came out harsh, but I meant every one of them. I was done being manipulated, done being lied to. It was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears, her body trembling as she realized that I was serious. There was no more pleading, no more trying to change my mind. She looked at the suitcase, then back at me, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We can still make this right. I shook my head, my expression unchanging. No, Lisa. We're done. Take your things and go. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. She finally moved, her hand shaking as she grabbed the suitcase, her eyes avoiding mine. I watched as she turned and walked out the door, her shoulders hunched, her steps slow and reluctant. She paused for a moment on the porch, as if she was waiting for me to call her back, to tell her that everything would be okay. But I stayed silent, my heart hardened against her. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done. She walked to her car, her movement slow, almost as if she was in a daze. I stood in the doorway, watching as she opened the car door, her gaze flickering back to me one last time. I didn't say a word. I just watched as she got in and drove away, the taillights disappearing into the night. As the sound of her car faded into the distance, I closed the door, the house falling into silence. I stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath, letting the stillness wash over me. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the pain, all of it was behind me now. I had taken back control, had made the choice to end things on my terms. And as I turned and walked through the now empty house, I felt a sense of peace, a feeling of freedom that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was time to start over, to build a new life for myself, free from the shadows of a broken marriage.